I say to you today, as I look over the past 4 years, that when crime has been going up 9 times as fast as population, when over the last 4 years we've had riots in 300 cities that have cost 200 lives and 7,000 injured, and when the time has come when a president's commission finds by a poll that 43% of all Americans are afraid to walk on the streets of their cities at night, then it's time for a house cleaning, a new attorney general, and new leadership to restore law and order, respect in this country.
Under federation, we are Nixon.
Excitedly, in the cold dark of a small Republican town in the Midwest, they wait to greet the man they hope will be the next president of the United States. They at least feel some enthusiasm for Richard Nixon, perhaps the new leader of the Western world. Can Richard Nixon stage what would in politics be the greatest comeback since Lazarus?
People are predicting that they think we're going to win, and of course that's what we're trying to do. But I want to make one thing very clear, and I make it clear to you, we're taking nothing for granted. You're going to see more of us in Illinois. We're going to put on the strongest finish in American political history, because believe me, we can't take a chance, and we're going to sock it to them from now on out.
What would his victory mean for America? Can Tricky Dick, of whom it was said, would you buy a used car from this man, bring back the Republican Party's great days?
Election time's here, folks!
The old Republican tradition began a century ago with a man everyone would have bought a used covered wagon from. Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, the man of principles, the greatest Republican, who freed the Negro slaves and brought about a terrible war. And now, once again, the Negro and war dominate and torment an American election.
I believe.
Mr. Lincoln, what are you in real life, a Republican or a Democrat?
Democrat, liberal Democrat.
What do you think of Richard Nixon as a Republican?
Well, I don't think he's the best Republican. I think he's a conservative Republican, and I don't think much of him as a public speaker or a public servant. I could go on and on, I guess, talking about Nixon, but I feel that he never really says anything, and I'm disgusted with Nixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lincoln. Are you a Republican?
No, I'm a Democrat.
What do you think of republicanism?
Well, I, like Mr. Lincoln, am in favor of the two-party system, but I also am disgusted with our whole political system at the moment, as of this summer with our conventions and whatnot.
What do you think of Richard Nixon?
I don't like him, but I'll vote for him.
Why don't you like him?
I don't like him because he's not going to do anything. He's not going to really do that much. But perhaps with his people behind him, he can. He is a man. He's not going to do anything. And I think he's better than Humphrey, though, because I think Humphrey will be a carbon copy of what we have right now.
And you don't like that?
No, I don't.
What do you think of Richard Nixon?
I think he's an opportunist. Simply that. I don't think he's that much different than Wallace, a little better educated, a little slicker.
I think his message is the same as Wallace's.
Well, I think he's been around a lot longer. He's learned to modify it and tailor it a little better, a little Kennedy market research. But other than that, I think their basic philosophy and methods are the same.
Do you think the existence of Wallace's campaign and his message is going to drive the Republicans further to the right?
Yes, I'm afraid of Wallace scares me to death.
Are you a Republican?
No, I'm a Democrat.
What do you think of the Republicans?
I think I'm going to vote for them this year.
Really? Why?
Because they're the lesser of the evils. And I think in the last two elections, we've had to make decisions like this. Which would be the least worst candidate? And again, this year, it would be Nixon, who would be least worse, perhaps, than the other two.
Why do you think the American system throws up leaders about whom you have to make this rather dismal choice?
Well, of late, there's been quite a bit of written material published on this subject itself. And they talk about the president makers, those people who can control the whole political system in America. Certain corporation leaders, certain congressional leaders who can actually pinpoint the men. Therefore, we don't really have so much a say-so as who we want, who the people want. Well, we're voting actually for what the bloc likes or what the bloc doesn't like. And unfortunately, most people don't think like the blocs do.
Are you saying to amend Abraham Lincoln's remark that government of the people, for the people, and by the people has perished in America?
Yes, perhaps so, right.
Lincoln won the spontaneous affection of his people in a way the present Republican candidate never has. Delight nowadays is organized by Madison Avenue. What do you think of Richard Nixon?
If I had another choice, I wouldn't vote for Nixon. But because of the system the way it is, I want my vote to count, so I'll vote for Nixon.
What would you like to see a Nixon victory bring about? I mean, what differences would you like to see in America?
The main thing is Vietnam. I guess everybody feels that way. Everybody home from Vietnam.
And do you think that with Richard Nixon there's a better chance of that?
Definitely.
Are you against America being in Vietnam at all? I mean, were you always against it?
Yes. Yes.
It's curious that people often think it's the Democrats, it's the sort of liberals who want to get out of Vietnam, but you describe yourself as a conservative who wants to get out of Vietnam.
Right. It's the same thing. I mean, if it's Vietnam, it's out.
I read with great interest this morning and great appreciation the editorial endorsement of the Moline Dispatch, and I also read the editorial which made the very proper point that this was not a beauty contest as far as this election was concerned, and I suppose the other side of that coin is that if it were a beauty contest, I wouldn't be in it. But as far as Pat is concerned, she'll win the beauty contest, and I'll do the talking.
Negroes in this part of Illinois are decorative and few in number, fine for a jamboree. But the Republican Richard Nixon does not address himself to them. Negroes belong to the Democrats, to Hubert Humphrey. The Republican appeal is to those who have and wish to keep. This is an America far from the rioting crowds. Nearly half the electorate live in and around small communities like Monmouth, Illinois. In this square, Lincoln debated with his opponent. Nixon refused to debate with Humphrey. The town has been Republican since Lincoln's day. This is the heartland of Republicanism. The turbulence of Mayor Daley's Chicago is 150 miles away. The Republican mayor of Monmouth is George Burstead. Could I ask you who you're going to support this year?
I'm going to support Richard Nixon.
If you had been mayor of Chicago at the time of the riots during the Democrat convention, how would you have told the police to behave?
I am of an opposite political nature than Mayor Daley, but I want to give him a real bouquet in the way they handled it, and I myself would have gone in and attacked them a lot quicker than the police force did in Chicago.
If there were demonstrations here in your town, how would you behave towards the demonstrators?
They would be in jail so fast it would make their heads swim. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with the law, but it is the law, so therefore it has to be upheld.
Do you think again that this sort of tougher attitude would be more general if there was a Republican victory?
Well, I think so. I think so. I think it. The people are getting fed up with it, and a Republican victory, which I am hoping for, and I think will come through, will certainly give precedence to what the campaign was about, of going back to law and order that is broken down all over the country, and the end result would be that we are going to be allowed to take a tougher attitude towards them and perhaps get some reversals on our Supreme Court rulings that have led to the protection of the criminal more than the protection of the innocent.
So you think that the liberal trend in America will be reversed?
Oh, I think so. I think so.
The birthplace of Wyatt Earp, Monmouth still clings to the cowboy's easy solutions. The gun can settle most problems. More than that, the gun is a symbol of freedom, as the children are taught in their social studies class.
Law and order, the situation as it exists in the United States, and particularly as firearms legislation pertaining to registration, licensing, and so forth. I think they're violating the rights of the individual citizen by attempting to take away our firearms. I like my guns. I have somewhere in the vicinity of about 100 of them now. I intend to keep my guns. I do not like the legislative program which they are putting through Congress to take these guns away.
Is this not taking away our national security, though, if they start with taking away the guns of the common people, and before long they'll be, as of now they're trying to take into world peace and taking away nuclear weapons, and this is leaving our whole country defenseless in a sense, isn't it?
Well, personally, I feel it is, yes, but some of the senators and representatives in Congress that are fighting for this type of legislation don't feel that way.
If we've got no intention of winning, let's get out or win it. One or the other.
How would you win?
If it took nuclear weapons, I would use them. And because I do not feel that Russia will go to war with the United States.
If the Republicans win this year, do you think the attitude you're expressing will be more powerfully expressed in America?
I think so. It's either win it or forget it, one of the two. I mean, it's bleeding is dry. So I don't see that we have any other choice.
Mr. Mayor, this is a traditionally Republican area, but I gather many people this time are going to support George Wallace. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of these people were the type that this year, if had Goldwater been running, he would have picked up a lot of the votes from this type of people, as well as your hardcore Republicans.
Or from the Wallace supporters?
Yes. I think.
How do you think Barry Goldwater would have done in this election?
I think Goldwater would have won it easier than Nixon.
Really?
Because he is a lot more conservative, and I think that conservatism has gained tremendously in the last 4 years since Goldwater last ran.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's basically due to taxation, the trouble in the streets with our Negro problem, and so people are getting fed up with it. That they think that from our drift toward socialism in the last 36 years, maybe it's time to take another look at it and stop some of it.
Slogans and balloons in this campaign have been a substitute for a serious debate on the crisis facing America at home and abroad. For Richard Nixon, the campaign has been an extraordinarily efficient presentation of a newly modelled man. His only error was the selection of a poor running mate, Spiro Agnew. As the Democrats say, Nixon's the one and Agnew's another. The meetings, the speeches, the applause are planned to the minute. The arrangements, like the performance, are mechanical, precise, and without life. What kind of man Richard Nixon is becomes impossible to tell. The fanatical anti-communist has disappeared. President Eisenhower's hatchet man has softened and moderated. Methodically, the well-traveled lawyer carries out his brief. Quiet, controlled, carried along on tides of hostility to President Johnson and the troubles of the Democratic Party. The local party bosses like him because he's helped them. Together, they greet the audience, each helping the other. 4 years ago, the Democrats won the greatest victory in American history. Can Richard Nixon really demolish that huge majority? In the small, pretty villages of Illinois, the local Republican bosses meet after having the satisfaction and pleasure of shaking the hand of their leader. But the experience did not seem to make the chicken fry a gay occasion. They were troubled by a new experience, being outflanked on the right by George Wallace.
When they vote for Wallace, well, then they're just going to vote for Wallace. Okay. And they won't go to the Republican and the Democrat ticket cast their votes. But on the other hand, I think if Wallace is elected, why, it'd be the worst thing that could ever happen to the United States.
Republicans, almost as much as Democrats, are troubled by the popularity and meaning of the third man, George Wallace. How many of their people are going to defect to the rabble-rouser from the South?
Things in a place where I've been in politics for 40 years, and I've never seen a time that you couldn't come some way near telling who was going to win.
The vast farmlands of the Midwest rustle with a spirit that haunts the calculating political bosses. Always independently minded, but in the past generous in impulse, the farmlands have gone sour. Wallace wins more than a third of their support because he is against big government as much as Negro rights. His appeal is to a country which has grown frightened. Further south in Illinois, in the motorcar plants along the Mississippi, hatred walks with fear and helps Nixon. In one plant, the majority of former Democrats were deserting to Wallace. In a bar at lunchtime, I talked to some workers.
Is it mainly the racial question, do you think, that is giving Mr. Wallace this support?
Oh, that's got quite a bit to do with it, but he's a good man any way you look at him.
What do you like about him?
I like that part about him, that he's going to bring law and order back. Where if you ain't got law and order, you ain't got anything. I mean, you're afraid to walk outside, why, you ain't got nothing.
I'm a Wallace man.
Why are you a Wallace man?
I think Wallace is for the working people, and I think we get a better deal with Wallace than anybody else.
Well, I believe that that he'll crack down on these niggers. That's what I think.
Yeah. Or do you think civil rights is going too fast to you?
Yeah, I do. I think they're wanting too much. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And I don't think that, to tell you the truth, I don't think they need half of what they got. Just, well, plain speaking, I don't think they need half of what they got.
I'll say hi to them, but I don't want to eat with them or take them home with me. Just simple as that.
Are there any other issues that he appeals to you on beside the racial question?
Well, he's just going to be a lot better off on this damn stuff. He's going to straighten up a lot of it on the streets and everything else. People can walk down the street without getting their head knocked off or wind up on business. People can't have a damn business without getting it burnt down or something like that.
Were you usually a Democrat? I mean, did you vote for Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I voted for Johnson.
Well, I wouldn't vote for Nixon. That's old Tricky Dick. He ain't worth a damn for nothing.
What about Mr. Humphrey?
Well, I'd rather have him than Nixon.
Is what Mr. Wallace says what you think?
He believes in law and order, and I believe in law and order myself.
What do you mean by law and order? What, is it a tough police force or what?
Well, if it takes a tough police force, yes. He said use ball bats or machine guns or any damn thing else, but that's what I'd use if I had to.
Against whom?
Against anybody. I don't care any group. I don't care whether it's white, black, or yellow, or red, but I'd use it against any group.
Who are doing what?
With destruction, law and order, or tearing down buildings, or burning down buildings, or anything else.
What do you think of the people who demonstrate in the streets about Vietnam and so on?
I think you ought to line them up against the wall and shoot them.
Were you a Democrat before?
Always. I've always been a Democrat, but I think this time I'm going to vote Republican for Mr. Nixon. Now, as I understand it, Mr. Nixon and Mr. Wallace are for the same thing. Only thing I think Mr. Nixon is a more polished person in business, administration, and everything else, where Mr. Wallace is not. He was a poor boy, and he come up. I don't think he's highly polished as Mr. Nixon.
But do you think in general, then, that Mr. Nixon will carry out much the same sort of policies as Mr. Wallace?
I think so, in a more suave way and more polished. You know, he is a more polished man than Mr. Wallace.
What do you think of Mr. Wallace?
That's where I think of him, like that. I don't think of him at all.
Does it frighten you at all that most of the people I've talked to in this bar, the workers here, seem to be supporting Mr. Wallace?
Well, I've only seen you talk to a few, and I don't think those few will get him in the White House.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think he's going to make it.
Yeah. But a lot of the people here were supporting him on grounds of law and order, as they say, and civil rights and so on.
Well, he sounds as if he want to put a billy club in one hand and a shotgun in the other hand. And this is not the kind of law and order that's needed. Sure, there's violence and stuff, but there's a way of coping and getting along with it and solving it. And actually, I think Humphrey is the man to do this.
You're supporting Humphrey?
I'm supporting Humphrey.
What do you think of Mr. Nixon?
Mr. Nixon, I think he's been in the race too long, and he's a loser.
With 4 days to go, this then is the man, Richard Milhous Nixon, still the favorite to be the new champion of the Western world.
As I speak to this whole nation, like Woodrow Wilson 50 years ago put it, I, speaking as a lawyer, can now say that my clients are the children. My clients are the future generation. That's what this election is about. And on the one side, an administration in which we have not had peace, an administration which not only do we have a war in Vietnam, but beyond that, when we look all around the world today and think of what I'm just saying now, you can't name one place in the world where the United States isn't worse off today than it was 8 years ago when Dwight Eisenhower left office. The Mideast, Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, the danger of war is greater, the hopes of peace are less, and respect for the United States of America has sunk to its lowest point in our history. But my friends, we stand at a great moment of history. When you get it down 8, 10, 15 years from now, you're going to look back in this year, 1968, and you're going to say, that was the year, that exciting year, in which America, beset with tremendous problems at home and abroad, in which America turned the corner, in which the American people saved America by what they did in an election. And you're going to look back and say proudly, I played a part. We've got to make sure that the American flag is not a doormat for anybody, any place in the world.